Very pleased to be able to welcome Chris Park to our virtual spring convention. He's been running skep making workshops and giving lectures for some years at the spring convention at Harper Adams, and he's well known to many of you. He also pops up on TV, magazine articles, as he has a very interesting farm, a big attraction, organic farm in Wiltshire. He spent lockdown working with friends on some bee-themed podcasts, Living Bee, interviewing beekeepers and scientists and artists. However, the presentation this afternoon was filmed in his bee house, and which is quite a Herculean effort to film that on your own in a bee house. So over to you, Chris.
Cheers. Sláinte, slánjivá, yachida, good health. Wassail. Bees, bees, hark to your bees, and hide from your neighbours as much as you please. But all that has happened to us you must tell, or else we will give you no honey to sell. Or else we will give you no honey to sell. Or else we will give you no honey to sell. Well, a good health upon you and yours and your bees and your family for this year. I'm going to have to... Oh, that's good. Wet my whistle a bit more. You know, there's an old triad from Wales. A triad is a collection of three things together, see. It's a very common motif in the bardic oral tradition, and they were written down by Welsh and Irish monks in the 11th, 12th, 13th, 14th century, and some a bit later on. So one triad, which comes from the west, Brecons, or actually all over Wales, but is attributed to some physicians, some ancient, this long lineage and legacy of Welsh doctors and physicians and medics called the Meddygon Mythfai, or the physicians of Mythfai. Here it goes, the three remedies of the physicians of Mythfai: water, honey, and labour. Isn't that great? I've seen it collected somewhere else as the three medicines of the world: water, honey, and labour. Excuse me. And it's such good advice, isn't it? You know, keep yourself hydrated. Even in the winter, you need to drink 6 glasses of water a day. They also said that these physicians, they also said that if your urine runs clear, then the physicians are unemployed. So it's good advice. Keep yourself hydrated. Good for your brain, good for your bones, and of course your kidneys and liver and your stomach. And honey. As beekeepers, we all know how medicinal honey is internally and externally. Such good medicine. In fact, I subscribe to the theory that the old words for honey are in fact the root of the word medicine. So we have today in Anglo-Saxon, we have honig, which just means, it's a shame, it's a lovely word, but it basically means yellowish. You know, but the old words for honey, I mean, and of course the words for honey in Europe and Eastern Europe, still from the ancient Sanskrit madhu, we still have miod, we still have mit, we still have miel, we still have meli, still there in apis mellifera, and meth was mead. Which brings me on to the third remedy, the third medicine of the world is labour. So yes, keep busy, use it or lose it. Good bit of cardiovascular, good, yeah, it's a no-brainer, isn't it? That if everything's working well and ticking over, then it's good for us. A good stretch, a good bit of yoga in the morning. If you have an office job, go for a run whenever you can, whatever, you know. So keep moving. A friend of mine, an American friend of mine, he's a very wise man, and he told me that the people in America with the lowest cancer rate are the Amish, because they're always busy. They're always doing. They're always working, crafting by hand. Less mechanism, more organism. So it's great, isn't it? This triad is just such good advice. And when you put these three things together, so sometimes triads have a deeper meanings, these kind of triunic wisdom. So when you put these three things together, when you put water, honey, and work together, of course, that creates mead, meth. And there's so many epithets of mead: the drink of immortality, the beverage of kings, the mead of poetry, the mead of wisdom, the mead of inspiration. All these things are good for us. Excuse me. And what a great creative strategy for life. Some tonic brew of some medicinal honeyed beverage. I would add, actually, a wild fermentation as well. I'm going to confess that I don't like most contemporary meads that you might buy in the shop. They're too sweet, or they're too strong, or they've got that yeasty kind of grapey taste to them. And I'm sure they're made with great art, and some I do like. Some I would vouch for. I think are great. But when a mead is crafted with a wild fermentation, perhaps using some bee bread or pollen as a nutrient, it has such a broader taste, and it doesn't get too strong, so it won't get above might get to 11%, but rarely, normally come out at about 7.5 to 9% alcohol. So it's a tonic drink. It's not something to get really drunk on, and it's a prophylactic tactic, and is so good for you in so many ways, containing all the medicines of the hive. You see some skeps and a log hive behind me. So I do keep bees in many different ways here, some of them on fixed comb. And one of the brilliant discoveries about keeping bees on fixed comb is that you often get, when you harvest on the comb, you often get honeycomb that will be honey, or capped honey on one side, and on the other side you get quite a lot of bee bread, and maybe some royal jelly and more wax and pollen, of course, pollen, propolis, and that goes into the mead vat. So these ancient meads, there's an old saying, mead is as strengthening as meat. And I think that is an old saying, going back to times when we made these meads from all or more of the medicines of the hive, rather than just today, if they indeed even is honey in that mead, even if the honey is not glucose syrup or corn syrup or something, then these old meads have more medicine in them, not honey separated from the brood box in a super. Okay, so welcome. I'm sat in Oxfordshire, South Oxfordshire, near the Wiltshire border. There's the Uffington White Horse in the distance, the Thames Valley that way, and Oxford that way, and Swindon that way. And it's a nice organic farm. There's a spring here and running water. I'm in a small woodland with lots of willow, coppice, and many different trees, and wildflower meadows around. And it's nice to be on an organic farm, isn't it? And close to organic forage. And so it's quite reassuring that the bees will get quite a lot of their forage will be organic. And that's a good feeling. And I keep bees here treatment-free, and always have. I just happened to be in the right place at the right time when I decided to start keeping bees here. So my route into beekeeping is quite unconventional. It's the tap roots were ancient technologies and natural crafts, and I'm a druid, so that kind of symbolic druidic practice, and combining the two in the medicines and the folklore and the stories and the songs. So I was fascinated in how ancient British culture harvested honey and kept bees. I lived in an Iron Age village over 20 years ago as an Iron Age person for a project, and You know, we had grain stores full of peas and beans, and had kale, a lot of kale, and we had goats for goat's milk, and cows and sheep and hens and geese, and of course honey. And it's such a great substance. And looking to the past to look to the future is an important thing. You know, empires rise and fall, the state of the world at the moment, climate change and pandemic. Who knows what's around the corner? But we all know that if we can keep bees, then that's a great thing for us, for our families, for our community, and not just for a kind of anthropocentric point of view, but also for the world, for the plant kingdom and other animals. Bees are just a blessing for so many things. So that's where I'm coming from, really. And so I keep bees in conventional ways as well, or conventional hives, but all bees here are treatment free, and they're all allowed to swarm because I don't have really immediate neighbours. And it's one of the strategies that bees employ to shake off pests and diseases, and they've been doing that for millions of years. They're experts at adaptation, and I believe that that's a very healthy way to keep bees, because you're renewing comb a lot, and they are always reduced colonies, so I'm not artificially producing large honey producing units where disease can run rife and you would have to treat with chemicals and things. These are lots of small healthy colonies of bees. And we're close to Oxford. I want to mention Oxford. We'll get to that in a minute. So another triad. This is an old triad that was collected by Geoffrey of Monmouth, who began to write histories down many years ago. You could say he's the first kind of historian, one of the early historians of Britain, but he's more like a storyteller. He's more a collector of legends and myths, as well as histories. This triad has to be old, just because of its content. So as the bards relate, the three names of the Isles of Britain. The first name, before this island was ever settled and invaded, it was known as Clas Merddin, or Plas Merddin. Merlin's place, Merlin's precinct, Merlin's classroom. Translated in other ways, it is an island, a green island surrounded by seas, as these isles are. Merddin being translated as sea, and the great green island surrounded by the seas, with that sweet and warming Gulf Stream coming our way. So the second name of the Isles of Britain, when it was first settled or invaded, Evel Innis. And you'll be overjoyed to know that is the Honey Isles. The Honey Island, or the Island of Honey. Isn't that brilliant to know that you're sat, if you're in Britain, or stood or working and living within the Honey Island? And you can take that literally, can't you? You can take that as, okay, great, yep. When people first came here, there were colonies of bees everywhere, dripping out of ancient oak forests and swarming all over heather heathland and buzzing amongst the wildflower meadows and lowlands and wetlands. Of course, take it literally, great. I think it might have other meanings. These bardic riddles had deeper meanings, and so the Island of Honey could refer to the fact the land is sweet here. The land is fertile. The land is benevolent. The land here, these islands, are full of minerals. If you look at a geological map of the Isles of Britain, you'll see so many different minerals all the way from north to south. And if you look at a geological map of, say, northwest Africa, it's not so diverse. We have a diverse amount of minerals here, and ore, and iron, and gold, and tin. And of course, we know in the Bronze Age that the Phoenicians held these islands in Cornwall, especially in Brittany and Wales. It was a secret location that would come all the way through the Mediterranean, around the Iberian Peninsula, and up to the Isles of Britain. They called it Baratanak, the island of tin. They came here for good quality tin. In the Bronze Age, if you wanted good quality bronze, you needed good quality tin. And towards the end of the Bronze Age, the quality of tin went down because they were cutting it with lead and other things, which possibly sparked an Iron Age. So the Phoenicians from modern day Lebanon and were in cahoots and rubbing shoulders with the Minoan Empire, and we know in the Bronze Age they had a quite advanced beekeeping practice. And think of this old saying, another old saying: if you want to make something out of metal, you must first make it out of wax. So think Bronze Age, think beekeeping, think tin and copper and wax. So they were coming here, this island of tin, and the Romans came here for minerals. So many people have come here because it's this fertile land surrounded by this Gulf Stream, and it's a magical place, isn't it, this island? So the land is sweet here, these honeyed islands. It could even have deeper meanings than that. It could have like the mead-amused mellifluous words of the bards of old Britain. You know, their healing, medicinal, honeyed poetry and prophecy. It could allude to that also, that this was a seat of the bards. The Isles of Britain was the stronghold of the Druids. There's such a strong influence the Druids had upon Europe that the Romans came here to try and eradicate them. But they went underground, and it's all resurfaced since in the last 400 years. It's had a renaissance, and that's one of my taproots into beekeeping is Druidry. So I like to extol the virtues of all things Druidic, and so these languages, Uvelinis and Plasmyrthin, are Celtic. It's Welsh, similar to Cornish, similar to Breton, and it comes from a time when these languages were spoken all across the Isles of Britain. And the third name was Ynys Prydain, which is still the name for Britain in Welsh today. And it comes from a king, King Prydain, and he's a shining one, a radiant king, the first ruler to unify the Isles of Britain under one house, under one kingship. And those are the three names of the Isles of Britain. And so I mentioned Oxford because it comes up in a great honeyed myth of British and Welsh mythology. I'm sat here, it's the 9th of March, and the cherry plums are flowering. The first kind of good nectar in the hedgerows is the cherry plums, and then will come the bullaces, and then the blackthorn, and eventually the maythorn, and then we come to the May season, and in May suddenly, whoomph, the whole of the hedgerows are greening, and the whole of the land is greening, and the forests are greening, and the flowers are opening. There's great forage. The lovely candles upon the horse chestnuts are opening, and it's a great time. It's a fecund time. It's a fertile time, and we all know that saying, a swarm of bees in May is worth a load of hay, or in Ireland they say a swarm of bees in May is worth a cow and a half that day, and so it's a great time. And the 1st of May in the old Iron Age Celtic calendar is known as Bealtaine or Beltane, and it comes from a deity known as Bel or Belinus or Belimauer or Apollo Belinus, the Romans called him, because he served a similar function to the solar Apollo deity of the Roman pantheon. So he's often seen with like a solarization of rays of hair coming out of his head. And his feast day was Beltane, the 1st of May. And it is now the 1st of May. Beltane. Bel, the deity, and Chinna or Tan, fire. So the fires of Bel. And at this time, fires were lit and people jumped over fires, or 2 great bonfires were lit, and livestock would be driven through these fires. So they've been in close quarters, overwintered on farmsteads and homesteads, and at this time they were driven out of the homestead, the farmstead, to wider pasture. This is when your horizon expanded as the greening of the land happened. It's a great time, fertile time, and many traditions and customs were made to ensure the fertility of the land. and you would light these fires and put on purgative herbs, and that would be like a cleansing process for your livestock or for people if they were ill or needed some extra verve. Well, Beli Mawr, one of the epithets and one of the ways Belinus, this great deity, is apparent in British mythology and folklore. Beli Mawr, the king Beli Mawr, had two sons, Lud and Levolus. And Levolus was the wisest of the two, which is perhaps why he went to mainland Europe and bound his troth and married a Gaulish princess. And then Lud became the king of Britain, the king of the Honey Island. His favourite port was London, and some legend will tell you that that's where London gets its name from, Caer Lud, this favourite port of King Lud. Think of Ludgate, think of Lechlade, Quicklade, all these. The River Thames was once known as the Lud. And in his reign, there's another triad, which is the three plagues of the Isles of Britain. And one of them was a hideous scream that issued throughout the land on the eve of May Day, on the eve of Beltane, this great fertility festival. And this scream caused the antithesis of the festival. It caused infertility and miscarriage. So Lud consulted his brother, he was wiser, and he said, you have to measure the length and the breadth of the Isles of Britain. And at the very centre of the Honey Island, you must dig a pit and place a vat full of mead. For these screams are coming from two snakes, two great serpents that are rising into the air and flying into the air and are fighting. And they will do this on May Eve, which is a great magical time, this liminal time between this world and the other world, where the spirits walk amongst us more freely and more loudly and more visibly. They said, you must dig a pit at the centre of the Isles of Britain, put a cauldron of mead in there and a cloth on top, and have a stone casket ready. And so that's what he did. He measured the length and breadth of the Isles of Britain, and lo and behold, the centre, kind of mythical centre of the Isles of Britain, was a place called Rhydychen, which is Oxford. And still today in Oxford, you have this crossroads, this cardinal crossroads that runs north, east, south, and west to the four cardinal points of the compass, the Carrefour, the four ways of the Carfax crossroads. So Lud did this, and on May Eve, the serpents, who spent most of the year in the guises of pigs, rooting around, rose up into the air, began fighting, and then they fell into the cauldron, which reminds me of another triad that which relates to mead, or drinking in all its forms. Is that 3 cups a prudent person may take. The first for constitution's sake, the second for the sweetheart they love the best, and the third to lull them to rest. Which are the kind of functions of a tonic honey brew, aren't they? Health, fertility, and that soporific lulling you to sleep. Okay, so back to the story. They fell into the mead vat and they drank themselves into a stupor, and the sheet was placed on top of them, which symbolised the Isles of Britain. The stone casket was closed, which symbolised the world, and they were shipped off to a strong mountain in Snowdonia, the strongest mountain in the Isles of Britain, known as Dinas Apharawan, the Mount of the Pharaohs. Well, there we see honey saving the day, and across the board in comparative mythologies we see that all over the place. And so think of Odysseus wanting to get into the underworld. In the Greek mythologies, we see the great beast Cerberus at the gates of the underworld being placed into a soporific sleep with either, the tales vary, but it's either barley cakes soaked in mead, or they're honey cakes made with honey. And here, again, this benevolent substance, this benevolence of bees and bee medicines placates these wild mythical forces, these wild natural forces, and saves the day. I'd like to bring in another far-reaching piece of mythology, actually, and it's great. I love it that we've got this solar deity of Britain with these solarizations and these two suns using mead in this cauldron in this way. And if you look at the Hindu pantheon, one of the ancient gods of the Hindu pantheon is Surya, the sun god. And often in India, you'll see these sun discs with this face on. This is Surya with these kind of solarized hair. I loosely base my hairstyle and with this kind of this bindi in the middle, which sort of signifies divinity and wisdom. And Surya had two sons, and they were horse-headed, and they preceded the dawn every morning. They would come riding over the horizon, preceding Usha, who's the goddess of the morning, the goddess of the dawn. She is the dawn. And they would also bring with them mead. Isn't that great? So this sons of a solar deity bringing mead. It's such a recurrent theme. Hey ho! Well, the sun is streaming through. The sun is streaming through the window. I'm sat in the. I'm just going to try and adjust the camera a bit. But I'm sat in the apitherapy house. So this is a building that I've built to maximise and uphold the purity of the element of air within the building. So there's a bank of beehives here, and just like most bee houses, of course, the bees come and go from the outside. The entrances are outside, facing the south. And there's a bee bed, a couple of bee beds. And you can lie down on top of the bee beds and hear the bees, and you do get micro vibrations, but mainly you walk into the room and you can smell that sweet, spicy beehive air smell, which is the finest air in the world. You know, within the hive, it has to be antimicrobial, antibacterial, antibiotic, antiviral, antifungal, because the brood are open to the air. You know, the eggs and the larvae are open to the air. So it'd be like if a human being, if a woman had like a big window open in her belly to a developing fetus, she'd need to be in a very clinically clean place. Well, that's what the bees create, and it percolates through and fills up this room. And we have face masks in here. We can have a sort of concentrated dose, and it's always been a therapy, like indirectly for thousands of years, but since it's directly been researched since the 1980s, first by an Australian group of beekeepers. And now these apitherapy beehive air rooms, and some of them are really small, like a coffin, in fact, you know, very, very intense, and are really common mostly in Russia, Ukraine, and Slovenia and Poland, but they're catching on in Canada and the States. And I think this is probably the first beehive air building in the UK. But you can do it. You know, it's basically a shed with beehives in it. I've kind of designed them to be like one big Dartington hive. They're all on 14 by 12s with dividers in between. There's room for 7 colonies. And I've insulated the walls with sheep's wool, and I've not used any varnish or any less salubrious substances. It's just pine, naked pine, dressed with linseed oil, and I love it. And it's a great space, and it's kind of become my office. But I also offer it out to the world as a kind of apitherapy on Airbnb, would you believe? B&B Air or beehive air therapy. So that this is just a bit of a plug, I suppose, for that, but also saying that it's possible for you to do this, or if you're a club apiary, or if you've got an allotment or somewhere, then it's actually quite surprisingly easy thing to do. And you can, what I've used are these sleep apnea masks, and it's such a good medicine for respiratory disorders and asthma and just stress in general. It's a great thing. And through researching beehive air therapy, and I'm actually training as an apitherapist, I've discovered that bees are surrounded by a negative ion, which is really good for you. And you know, like a rushing mountain stream of water, moving water, a waterfall creates negative ions, and positive ions cause stress and dis-ease within the body. So much so that if you live in a Mediterranean country where this Saharan wind whips up of the Sahara and lands in the Mediterranean, and it's called the ill wind, and it's full of positive ions, positively charged air, and it causes people to go crazy. That and you could legally you can have a court pardon if you've committed a crime during this ill wind because you weren't yourself, because you were stressed, and this is the science and the sorcery. I like to see that beehive air is the perfect mixture of science and sorcery, because you can't see it and you're immersed in it. You can smell it, and the more you stay in here, you just feel it working upon your being on many different levels. Recommended. And so part of the folklore around bees, or the urban myth around bees, is that it's not the oldest profession, but it's the profession of the longest lived, and the data could be skewed, couldn't it? Let's face it, that most people become beekeepers once they've already reached a ripe old age, in retirement. So the data is possibly skewed by that. But also bee medicines must help, and bee venom must help, and good honey and propolis, of course. During March and April of 2020, in the Hubei province, the beekeepers there made a survey amongst beekeepers, and they received data from 5,115 beekeepers, and not one of them had any symptoms of COVID-19. And some of them were working as apitherapists right at the centre of Wuhan city. And many of them were rural, so it could be why. But some of them were working with clients whose relatives had symptoms of COVID-19, but their clients didn't. So you're in good standing as beekeepers, and you're surrounded by prophylactics, and you're surrounded by medicines, and so you can feel reassured, perhaps. And sadly, we've lost some prominent beekeepers over the last year. So I'd like to make a toast to them, to absent friends. And if you've lost anyone through this pandemic, then to them too, to absent friends. And so let's share 3 breaths with those beekeepers that had inspired us. And with you and your beekeeping. And a breath with how your beekeeping might inspire those around you. So again, a blessing upon you. Whether you subscribe to faith or folly or science or sorcery or whatever you believe, modern science is now sort of coming into line with ancient indigenous wisdom. Is that thinking positively creates positive outcomes. I mean, it's a no-brainer, isn't it? That prayer and wishes and good intention, when you look at quantum physics, can be the key to health and well-being and creating change in a positive way. So good health, and a blessing upon you, and a blessing upon your bees, and upon this season and the world actually at this time. May beekeeping help the world in many, many, many ways. May bees continue to be protected and preserved. And I don't know about you, but I do hold a bit of anger still about our government allowing the use of neonicotinoids, like they've kind of prioritised sugar beet over honeybees and other insects. What a great shame. I know it's just an emergency use and might not be implemented all over the place, but it's still a bit misinformed, and I'll get over it. I'm sure the British Isles will too, and the honeybees will too. So yes, here's to a good year. See you somewhere soon. Thank you. Bees, bees, hark to your bees. Hide from your neighbours whenever you please. But all that has happened to us you must tell, or else we will give you no honey to sell. The maiden in her glory upon her wedding day must tell the bees her story, or else they'll fly away. Fly away, die away, dwindle down and leave you. But if you don't deceive your bees will not deceive you. Marriage, birth or burying, news across the seas. All your sad and merrying, oh you must tell the bees. Tell 'em coming out to dinner where the fanners fan, 'cause the bees are just about as curious as a man. Now don't you wait where trees are when lightning comes to play. Now don't you hate where bees are, or else they'll pine away. Pine away, dwine away, anything to leave you. But if you never grieve your bees will never grieve you.
Thank you so much for that, Chris. It was absolutely brilliant. You covered so many topics. We don't quite know where to start with the questions, but maybe the first one is, you obviously filmed it in your bee house. Perhaps you could tell us more about your bee house and what happens there.
Okay, yes, can do. So I give it a few different names. Sometimes we call it the bee bedroom because there are beds in there and you can sleep on top of bees. I also call it the apitherapy house. I mean, I'm lazy. I say apitherapy, and but maybe it should be apitherapy, shouldn't it? But I've heard some people say apitherapy as well. So, but it's the apitherapy house or the bee bedroom, and it's slowly becoming my office because I love it in there so much. And it's a room that's designed to harness beehive air, and it's which has become a registered kind of acknowledged therapy since the 1980s. It's been researched first by an Austrian family. And I'm training as an apitherapist, so I got very into all the different bee medicines, and that one in particular just caught my attention. I thought that I don't think there are many other bee houses in Britain, even though there are bee houses and they have always been a thing. To design them to particularly harness beehive air is very popular in Russia, Ukraine, Eastern Europe, and it's catching on in Canada and America and France and other places. I thought, why don't we have them in this country? So I did some research and just started building one. I thought, well, I need a new bee shed. So I gathered stones from the hedgerows around the farm and put some lovely sheep's wool insulation in it. And it's a bit like one massive Dartington hive, if you like. All the frames are on 14 by 12s. And the entrances are on the outside. And you sit on the inside and there are vents and there are face masks. And you benefit from that lovely sort of sweet, spicy beehive air that's full of antimicrobials, antifungals, antibiotics, and all the sources of the pollen and the nectar build up in that room. And sometimes, I'll just get home from work and I'll lie down on those beds, and there's just something about the air. I mean, you'll know it, Avis, because you're a beekeeper, and most people watching are beekeepers. But there's something about when you get a lovely waft of that air coming out of a beehive. There's nothing like it, is there? And they're all slightly different flavors as well, aren't they?
Well, they are, because particularly in the summer, I love going down into the garden in the evenings, and there's this wonderful buzz of the bees as they're drying the honey out. And the smell at that time of year is obviously very different to what it is in the winter or other times of the year. Yeah. Yes,
that's true. And inside the apitherapy house, it's a different energy in there in the winter to summer as well, because all the bees are indoors most of the time, but there are less of them, but they've got a good store of honey. And yeah, it does change. But of course, there's nothing like being in there when they're on a day like this, when there's zum 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 and merrily coming and going. And as you've just heard in that lovely song about telling them the news.
Yes. Oh, well, that feeds into another question about the tradition of telling the bees when somebody dies. And we wondered if you told them about the Duke of Edinburgh.
Well, I haven't mentioned the Duke of Edinburgh to them, actually. I mean, I never met him. I don't think they met him. But it is news, isn't it? And you're right. Just the folklore and the customs of telling the bees, it's not just about one's own death, or someone else would be telling you the bees about your death, but it's not just about funeral rites and mourning. It's just about the general news. You just keep the bees informed, and I think there's always some kind of pragmatic science within the sorcery and the folklore. So, you know, if you're often visiting your bees and having your face by the entrance and, you know, breathing on them and telling them and whispering to them, they're going to get used to it, aren't they? They're going to get more used to your facial recognition and your smell, and it's just a deeper relationship is forged, isn't it? When you're with your bees more and sharing with them, and in that place of speaking from the heart, you know, telling them the news is a different place than if you're rushing around, you know, wondering what they need from you, or trying to get that lid back on without squashing a bee, or, you know, or wondering if it's going to rain. You know, there's a different quality of being with your bees then, isn't there?
Yes, I often call it communing with my bees, trying to get in onto the same sort of friendship levels, etc. I mean, one of our beekeepers in our association died this year, and his widow was interested in the bees. I think she had great comfort actually from going down and telling the bees that Frank had passed away. Yes, yeah.
Yeah, it can be really cathartic. Yeah, of course.
Yeah. We all liked your mention about the mead. And so do you mix your mead with anything, or do you drink it straight?
Well, my first encounter with mead was a long time ago, around a sacred fire with a group of druids, a grove of druids, and it's like and it's passed around. You know, this horn is passed around the whole people, and everybody gets a bit. And ironically, it's a bit like the flu jab. You know, so everybody drinks from the same vessel, and you'll get a bit of each other's sort of antibodies, and, you know, it keeps the community immunity strong. And after that, you know, someone comes over, and you know, after the sort of ceremonial reverence, you move into the kind of more mirthful phase of the evening, and somebody will mix some mead with some champagne and said, "This is known as a druid's delight." Oh, great! I'll try some of that. Thank you very much. And then a bit later on into the evening, you know, when some of the lesser-known stars have risen above the horizon, then someone will inform you, "Oh, here's another mix. If you mix mead with whiskey, this is known as Druid's Ruin." And of course, "Oh, thank you. I'll have some of that." You know, and so, but I mean, joking aside, I don't normally mix mead with anything. I normally make lots of small batches of mead that are already all unique in themselves, because they'll be infused with different herbs, or they'll have other properties in them. So I make lots of batches that have different qualities. Like I make a really floral kind of giddying, euphoric batch with maybe more lemon and lots of elderflowers and other things, or I might make a more kind of astringent brew, you know, for your gut, from using maybe like yarrow and mugwort and more things like that. So they've all got a particular flavour and a particular taste anyway. And some are kind of deep and dark because they're made with sloes, you know, or others are kind of light and slightly effervescent and even thing. I mean, I've mentioned some quite strong herbs in the presentation, but just this year, a friend came over and we made some yew-berry mead, and it was quite risky because every single part of the yew tree is toxic and can kill you. Apart from the, you know, Taxus baccata, the sort of clue is in the title. But the flesh around the pip, so the flesh of the berries, are quite sweet and they're non-toxic. So a long time was spent with a fork, kind of de-seeding all of the berries, and much care was taken that not one seed got into the batch. And that had still has a particular foamy flavour when you pop the cork. It just all comes foaming out of the bottle like a real lava. And it took ages and ages for the yew berries to kind of mix with the mead must. They just kept floating on top. They're like so agglutinant and gelatinous. I would mix it, and then it always end up floating on top and trying to push up through the airlock, and I'd mix it again. I ended up tipping half of it out and sort of getting a kitchen utensil sort of whizzer thing on it to whiz them all up, and they just ended up floating on top. But eventually they sort of settled into the must. So that's so no, I don't often mix mead with other things. Also, you know, for the fear of a hangover, I suppose, you know, the less mixing you do, the better you feel in the morning. Isn't that true? Is that true? It's true for me anyway.
I actually think with all those different varieties of mead, mixing it with anything else is not necessary.
Exactly.
I didn't realise you could have so many different flavours. I must admit, I went through a phase of being offered mead by various beekeepers who had a go at it, and some of it was like drinking disinfectant. And then when I tried some really good stuff, I loved it. It was really, really good. Yeah, I've never had a go myself.
No, I made not really a blunder the other day. It was quite a comical moment. But I was having dinner with a friend and some other folks, and some mead was passed around, and she's always bringing different meads to the table, and she brought one over and said, "What do you think of this?" And I said, I said, that tastes like your kind of local honey show mead," which I didn't realise at the time but it came out as a bit of a harsh comment, but it's sort of true, isn't it? You know, you get good ones and you get bad ones, but what I can say to everybody is that the longer you leave it, the better it gets, and as long as it doesn't oxidize, it only gets better. So you might make a mead and you might think, "Oh, I'm not going to share that with anyone. I don't think anyone would like that one." And if you just bottle it and leave it, you know, even a month later, you might open it and it can be remarkably much better. But yeah,
were you talking about months or years there?
Well, interestingly, the Romans had a practice of leaving it for 7 years was their rule of thumb. I think a year and a day is a lovely kind of a lovely measure, but even if it's in the bottle for a couple of months, it will make a difference and it will smooth out any kind of sharpness or unpleasantness that a mead might have when it goes in the bottle.
That's interesting. I wonder how long the monks at Lindisfarne keep theirs, because that was one mead I did really enjoy up there when I went up to Northumberland.
Yeah. There's a Polish practice. I know you're eager to ask another question, but there's a Polish practice of making a really, really sweet mead, like almost 50-50 water and honey, and it stays in the cellar. So there's lots of different types of mead in Poland. They have different names, and the kind of sweetest one is like too sweet to drink, and it's left for so long that it can become a family heirloom, and it's kept in the cellar. And like once a year, folks would go down and sample a bit and then put it back. And it would live on for decades.
Oh, brilliant. Right, okay, if we can move on to skep beekeeping, because we had an interesting thing this morning in one of the sessions when one of the presenters talked about the limits of skeps being that you can't inspect the bees. And I know you're a great advocate of skep beekeeping. So do you think it's necessary to inspect your bees?
I think it's necessary to understand your bees and to understand their health and well-being. And when I was first inspired to keep bees in skeps, I soon learned that of course there's an etiquette to keep your bees healthy, isn't there? And I think every beekeeper wants to have healthy bees.
Yeah.
And there's something. And I soon learned that keeping bees on fixed comb is illegal in many states of America and Germany and other places, but it's not illegal in this country. So I pursued it, but I went along the transparent route and, contacted the BBKA. I asked if anyone did it. They said no, but, go and see Carl Schauler. He'll tell you all he knows. And some people have done it a bit here and there, but not vastly. I couldn't find a skep apiary in those days. And luckily, I joined my local association, and the chairman at the time was Ron Hoskins, and he hadn't treated his bees in 10 years, though he does obviously inspect them. So so I got a colony from Ron, bees that I knew I didn't have to treat, and I just put them in a skep. And maybe 6 months later, the local bee inspector came and the sort of regional bee inspector, and they said some very good things and some very reassuring things. And they said that we just sort of lift up the skep and have a look. They said if you've got other movable frame hives in the same apiary, they can be used as a kind of control, because skep bees are very low stress. So the biggest vector for bee disease and stress is a beekeeper, isn't it? And once you open a roof, you lower the hive scent with the temperature, disperse the scent, break comb, break propolis, stress out the bees, and all of those things. When bee stress is high, their immune system is low. And so foul broods, the worst case scenario is if my neighbour gets a foul brood, then by law, bees in the skep have to be scrutinised. And every well-made skep and well-kept skep should have sticks, a bit like skewers in the sides, to act as brace comb that go through the plates of the comb. And you can take those out and cut the comb out one by one, and then sort of sheath bag them back into a new skep. So they can be scrutinized. And the bees, it's a self-repairing unit, so they will repair themselves, and the bees won't really thank you for it, but the bee inspector will. And but I think it's highly unlikely that skeps do succumb to disease in the same way that movable frame hives do, because they're less stressed and because they swarm every year. And I think that's key. So in a fixed comb system, bees are allowed to swarm. So there's a brood break in the mid-season, and the comb is virgin comb drawn by the bees themselves. So there's no other pathogens coming in from other comb, and it's part of bees. The bees have been around for millions of years, evolving these strategies to combat every pest and disease and beekeeper that's been thrown at them, and swarming is one of them, and drawing their own comb is another one, and they want to be on new comb, and that's another thing that happens with skep beekeeping as well. Comb is renewed a lot, and quite frequently, more often than that temptation to keep hold of that frame of brood comb because it's too old, but you might just put it in anyway because you need an extra one or something. That doesn't happen with skep beekeeping. Everything is just cut out and wax is harvested. You can go around with a blowtorch if you're really quick on a skep. And so I'd like to reassure folks that most wild colonies are healthy colonies because we are the biggest vector for bee stress and bee disease. But there is not saying that a honeybee might not, might land on a piece of toast with some non-EEC honey and bring in some pathogens and spores or something. But I would hope, and you can part comb and you can smell, a foul brood, and you can, if at the worst case scenario, you can cut it all out and have a look.
Yes.
Even though I don't do that every day, or every year.
Another question has popped up really on that same subject about can you collect honey from the skeps?
Yes. So this is a myth I'd really like to dispel, because it even says this on Wikipedia, which I do shake my skinny fist at quite a lot, especially where apitherapy is concerned. But on Wikipedia, it says, to harvest honey from a skep, you have to kill the bees. It's just not true. And I'll meet many knowledgeable old beekeepers, at bee clubs, and meetings who'll ask the same question. So it's just not true. You don't have to kill a skep load of bees to harvest the honey. You just cut out the side combs. That's the simplest way. So think it's a circle. A skep is a circle. You got brood in the middle, then pollen, then honeycomb on the outside. These are the smallest combs on the outside because it's a circle. You can cut some of that out any time of the year. Well, not in the middle of winter, I suppose, but you can make a spring harvest, make a summer harvest, make an autumn harvest of those side combs. And there are other ways, of course, driving the bees, which is a brilliant practice, and also you can do double hiving with a skep, like have a skep with a hole in the top and then use the cap and take that one off. And so there are many ways to harvest honey from a skep without harming the bees. I know it used to happen. I don't think anybody's revived the practice of sulfuring bees or drowning bees. And so yes.
I read about that. Yes.
You can keep happy and healthy stock in skeps.
Yeah.
And in a very good way.
Yeah. Well, I think we're very nearly out of time now.
Yeah.
So it just remains for me to thank you, and your enthusiasm for all these things is infectious, and it's been really a really enjoyable session with your presentation and your enthusiasm with the questions. So thank you very much indeed, Chris, for logging on and being with us this afternoon.
Well, you're very welcome. It's an absolute honour and a pleasure, and all the best. See you next time.
Thank you.
Thank you. Cheerio.